committees today, and then towards a final report due in the.
Right. And just so folks know, I believe we are recording this presentation so we can share it, refer to it later. And I think we're ready for the next slide here. This is also you, Sarah, or Allison, I believe.
Yeah, great. So I think the other thing just to say is that the House also, House Appropriations Committee also named the need for a working group that was going to specifically look at the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program with led by the Agency of Human Services Secretary's Office, and that group was going to have a report by the end of April proposal on what emergency housing, what the General Assistance Emergency Housing Program would look like during state fiscal year 22, and how that would transition towards a sustainable emergency housing program for state fiscal year 23 and beyond. That working group has been meeting. It's a separate group with some specific named members, some of which who are here today. We're not going to delve into details around the work of that working group, but just to say that our Housing Recovery Working Group and that General Assistance Working Group have had some overlapping members so that the conversations have been informing one another, and that the General Assistance Working Group did submit a proposal to Senate Appropriations on this topic, and we're actually going to use Thursday's statewide homeless assistance COVID homeless response call to hear from Commissioner Brown, who's going to go through the outline of that proposal. And I think, yeah, great. And so this slide is really just kind of looking at one of the challenges that's just overarching for us is the fact that we have a lot of households, obviously, who are in emergency housing due to COVID. We also know that we're going to lose some significant capacity in our lodging industry, our capacity to continue to use it at the levels we have been for emergency housing. And we know that part of what we need to do is make massive investments in terms of helping those families have places to exit to that are safe housing options. So you'll hear that reflected in the conversation today from this Housing Recovery Working Group to connect those dots. And we definitely understand the work of this group is tied to how we help people exit from emergency housing. And just to say, there's one other thing that you can maybe see in this chart and maybe can't see, which is just to say that we did make significant investments, right, with CRF dollars into housing people experiencing homelessness and in other programs like the CARES Housing Project and Rapid Resolution dollars. And we have seen people exit General Assistance Emergency Housing. We have seen people exit the motels, but we've also seen new people coming in. And so that's part of what this chart shows you, is that when we do make those investments, they do make a difference.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, so I'm up next. It's Jen Holler with the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. Good afternoon to everyone. So on the next slide, we'll kind of preview a little bit of our thinking, but as Josh transitions to that, I'll say that just to reemphasize that the primary purpose of this Housing Recovery Working Group, as laid out by the legislature or the House, was to take a look at the extraordinary opportunity that's offered by the funding sources that are in the American Rescue Plan Act, the latest of the federal stimulus funds, and to look at not only the specific federal funding that's going to come for housing to the state through the federal programs like home or the mortgage assistance or emergency rental assistance, but also to consider what might be possible around housing in the American Rescue Plan Act Fiscal Recovery Fund, $1 billion that's less specific that will come to the state. Right now, though, the state neither has actually those monies in hand, nor is there any guidance been issued on how most of those different pots of funds can be used. So much of what we've done in the working group so far was to assemble information about all those sources and then to begin to think about strategies that we would employ once those funds actually arrive, once the legislature and the governor work out how much they're going to put towards each of these different uses and the rules become more clear. So the chart or the slide in front of you now, and the darker blue arrows on the left are drawn from the specific language of the legislative charge. And we are to figure out how to use ARPA funds most strategically to help people who are experiencing homelessness transition to permanent housing. And then it lays out these 5 specific elements for us to look at. So what we've done as a group is to talk about different strategies. There are no, silver bullets here or anything magical. They're all things that probably we've explored or done on a smaller scale at other times. But how do we really work together to do them more effectively at a larger scale? And how does each line up to the various tasks put to us? So, for example, the very first is what we want to do is we want to do whatever we can to maximize all these sources to put together the 3 legs of the stool: capital, service, and rental support, to help folks transition out of temporary housing or shelter into permanent housing, while also building community capacity to sustain those folks over time. And the strategies that we see and will plan at this point to use would be clearly expanding the supply of permanent affordable homes with the capital investments that are available. And then also to try to integrate in a better way those 3 legs of the stool: capital, services, and rental assistance. BHCB received some funding from one of the previous fiscal packages and put it out for shelter improvements and permanent housing projects, and did that in coordination with the Agency of Human Services and the State Housing Authority as a way of trying to pull together and actually requiring applicants to talk about how they were going to integrate capital, services, and rental assistance in each of those particular projects and properties. But that was done on kind of a one-off basis, and we're trying to think about how that can be done better on a system at a statewide or through a more systematic approach. And one of the things this group is thinking about is actually, and we've talked about doing this for a while, it was actually a recommendation of the Roadmap to End Homelessness through a joint request for proposals that would include those 3 elements. So while I've been talking about just that first line, you probably have skimmed down to some of the other charges and related strategies. But we invite you to really look at those closely and to think about and have those in mind when we come to the end of the presentation and ask for your feedback and input. Just at a high level, I think expanding everybody's capacity to take on this larger challenge and the larger amount of resources that might be available. There's a lot of interest and feeling of urgency around converting motels and wanting to be able to do that to help people transition out of their temporary locations. We want to be able to do that in a way that makes good long-term situations for them, though, and can be good permanent investments. So that's a balancing act that we're all going to need to try to perform together. And then, of course, we're also going to want to be preventing homelessness through things like financial counseling, and there are some education and outreach elements that are that can be funded through some of the ARPA sources. So I think I will leave it at that and then pass it on and ask Josh to switch to the next slide.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Before we switch, Seth, Leonard, did you want to add any comments? I know you worked on this charge and related strategies quite a bit. Do you think there's anything that you'd like to highlight here?
I think what we can provide is hopefully a high level of confidence that regardless of the formal charge or existence of the working group, what you're seeing is a very coordinated and collaborative effort to solve problems and to come up with solutions that are streamlining as many resources together as possible to get at issues. So I think we'll all agree that regardless of whether that legislative language survived or not, those things in blue should be things as we get more state and federal resources at the table that we should all be striving for. And the items in gray are the items that I think we're looking for more feedback on and ensuring that we're thinking correctly, because we're trying to leverage, for example, short-term rental assistance alongside permanent rental assistance to ensure that it's done well, and the creation of a risk pool. These are ideas that we think have some opportunities for innovation and to increase the collaboration between all of our organizations going forward. So regardless of the formality of the working group, these goals and our entities are still working towards them, and hopefully that inspires some confidence on everybody's behalf as well. Thanks, Josh.
Great, thanks, Seth. So Josh Hanford here. I'm not sure if you could see me or not, or the slides are running off of my machine, I think. So it's I can't really see anything else. But for folks that don't know me, my name's Josh Hanford. I'm the Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. And we worked quite a couple months ago, actually, when it looked like the American Rescue Plan was going to be signed. I think it was signed March 11th into law. And we worked with our partners over at Agency of Human Services, Sarah Phillips and Allison Hart, and talked about what sort of housing investments were needed on the capital side to get the rapid deployment of units that would really help people transition from the emergency housing that some folks are in, hotel and motels right now, and other settings where a permanent home and long-term situation that Vermont could afford, it would be a much better place for everyone. We agreed on that goal. The governor also wanted to have some incentives for mixed income and home ownership as well. I think, this pandemic has really emphasized the importance of housing and shelter on public health, both for individuals and families, but also for communities. And so the governor really looked at this $1.3 billion of flexible money coming into Vermont through the American Rescue Plan Act. Just as a reminder, the whole act was about $2.7 billion coming to Vermont, and there was about a little over $1 billion that was considered flexible funding. All the guidance is not out on this yet, but we're pretty confident that housing was severely impacted by the pandemic. And the governor wanted a large historic investment in housing. We have been for decades talking about the needs for more affordable housing, missing middle housing, and all sorts of housing solutions. And so that's what the governor has proposed here, a $249 million housing investment plan broken out over 3+ years. With an overall goal of 5,000 units being supported with this investment. The first year focused on acute housing needs. We know we needed to invest in housing fast, rapid permanent housing to rehouse folks that are experiencing homelessness, as well as some increased shelter capacity. We knew that also is something that will be with us in the future. Unfortunately, we'll always have a need to help folks, that have had a natural disaster or fallen on hard times. And if we can learn from this experience and invest in these shelters in a more resilient way, there was a need to do that. And then investing in our existing housing stock through small rental properties that are offline or really non-code compliant. We've shown that we can do that with some of the CRF funds. That's the Vermont Housing Investment Program, VHIP, where we've taken small grants, averaging about $23,000 and brought 250 units online already. And the governor wants to continue that program with another $15 million investment there, as well as sort of a newer program to incentivize the supply and construction of what we're calling missing middle homes through the home builder program. We're just not seeing the production of these modestly priced homes for purchase. And a lot of working families have been priced out of home ownership in Vermont. And that has a ripple effect through the entire housing market. When someone can't move from rental housing into home ownership, it sort of puts a monkey wrench in the whole system. And so there's an effort to provide some small subsidies there to bring on over 1,100 modestly priced home ownership units over the next 3 years. And then, really exciting for many on this call too is an opportunity to really invest in the existing affordable housing and mixed income housing pipeline that so many of our developers, housing developers, nonprofit community partners, and others have been working on for years. We know these projects take years for planning and many more years to raise the funding to make them a reality. With this sort of investment, $90 million into that line item, we could essentially fund the entire affordable housing pipeline that we know right now over the next couple of years, rather than stretching that out over 5 to 10 years. So that's really exciting. We think we have a strategy here to make this historic investment something that we can look back on in 5, 10 years out and really see it as one of the silver linings from this crisis we've all been through. So, we'll have some time here at the end to take your input, address some of your questions, but just want to really, stress that this is just a proposal. Right now, I think Sean opened at the beginning of the session with some news that the Senate Appropriations Committee had just made some different decisions. Some of these investments were in their budget that they just passed, but not nearly enough, in my opinion. We had $129 million in ARPA funding proposed for year one. I think in the latest numbers I just saw at Senate Appropriations, it's only $17 million of ARPA funding in year one. There was some good news in there for general fund support of about $40 million to VHCB, but not close to the $129 million investment that the governor's proposed for fiscal year 22. So we're going to keep pushing this message that the time is now. We have unprecedented amounts of rental assistance through the two stimulus recovery efforts through the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which will provide, up to 18 months of rental assistance. But we need to build units of housing to fully utilize those resources and the support services that go along with that. And we can't really wait for capital to build these housing investments for years out. We should really be doing this now. We planned for this and don't have any time to wait. So just leave you with that. Stress that this is still an ongoing discussion and hope that we'll have many of your support for even more money for affordable housing before this session ends. So with that, I think I'm going to pass this on.
All right. Hi, I'm Maura Collins with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and following up on what Josh just said, I want to say, and that's not all. There's more money for housing. It gets very confusing very quickly about what all this is. I know you all are experts in this, but we were trying to help explain to the legislature and others how all this money works together. So we started thinking about, okay, we have the money from last year on the CARES Act that has already mostly been deployed, but not all. Then in December, there was a big pot of money for rental assistance that the State Housing Authority, Kathleen Burke's on the phone, and that Richard Williams, that they've been administering. Then we have the ARPA money that Josh has been talking about, which is this American Rescue Plan, ARPA. And then we still have the state budget that is coming out. And we want to sort of put our arms around all this money and figure what it look like in totality. So when you get the copy of the slides, which yes, will be available, you can click that link, Matrix of New Funding Sources, and you will see, for my fellow nerds, a Excel spreadsheet, color-coded, very overwhelming. Your eyes will start bleeding immediately, but it does have a row for all the different housing programs that have come from each of these sources. The problem is that it was changing over the weekend. It was changing last week. Apparently it's changed as of a half hour ago. It is going to remain very fluid. And so a chart like that is actually not totally helpful because it's a best guess based on plans at the current moment. So to sort of visualize and not have your eyes bleed, we created the picture on the next slide that Josh will go to. And it shows visually how these investments kind of play out. So we all know that housing is a continuum. And so this looks at people by their current housing status, meaning they're currently homeless, they're currently a renter, they're currently an owner. We know that people hopefully are moving back and forth, especially from currently homeless into becoming renters or owners. But this breaks down by their current housing status, what the proposed likely use of all this money is. Now, we already have said 4 times now that the legislature is looking at the ARPA money a little differently than what the governor has proposed and what Josh just laid out. We also know that any kind of matrix, when you look at the Excel spreadsheet, it is not going to do justice to the true eligibility or prioritization or full usage of the money. It's just a starting point because we kept getting asked so many times, wait, how much money's where? Is this the same thing as that thing? Is ARPA the same thing as ERAP? And how is that different than the vouchers that AHS is putting out? And so we were trying to create some clarity around that. We really can't do justice to the uses of this money. The sizes of these boxes are indicative of how much money is going to each use, but we won't really know how much money is going to each use until after all the money's spent. And we look back and we say, oh, that much was spent on past due rent, meaning rent arrears, versus that much was spent on rental assistance, the ongoing assistance that goes out every month. But based on a bunch of smart people who put our brains together, this is roughly what the proposals look like in terms of the sizes of the investments that have been proposed. If you add together both the governor's plan for the ARPA money that Josh just explained, as well as what has been spent in CARES Act money and the upcoming state budget as we understand it today, as well as that December stimulus program of additional rental assistance. On to the next. That's not me. Who's doing this one?
Josh, I think you got tapped.
Maybe Jen?
And you know, Josh is muted. He doesn't know it yet.
I can jump in. This is Jen Holler again. So when we anticipated that our work was going to be official, we had decided that we would, as next steps, we would continue to meet regularly as a group, and we often do that anyway, and we anticipate with the new resources that there's going to need to be kind of an accelerated effort around communication and collaboration and coordination. So we are all committed to doing that regardless of whether we are officially tasked to do that by the legislature or not. And I think this working group, just because we are the funders and need to work with the particular program rules and the administration side of things, that is just the start. We need input, and so we anticipate and are committed to outreach and engagement with others to help inform however these funds are being used, and also once we get started, regular check-ins. The Vermont Housing Finance Agency has also begun planning, and maybe with others, around a forum with contractors and builders to sort of provide them with some background, answer questions, start to give them some information in order to sort of prep that sector as much as possible for the level of activity that we hope to all be able to fund. And we had also talked about when we knew we were going to need to be doing a formal report, engaging with public hearings is a way of trying to connect with people with lived experience with housing insecurity and perhaps homelessness as well. And then also, regardless, as Maura, I think it was Maura who said earlier that we would continue to report, or maybe it was Allison, we would continue to report back through these two councils on what the working group is coming up with and how we are seeing the resources flow and what the best strategies are around that. So clearly you can hear me as I'm stumbling talking about this, that this is a work in progress because we're not quite sure exactly what our forums are going to look like. But we do know that we're committed to working together at the statewide level to try to coordinate and be as effective as possible with this extraordinary level of new resources that we can target to an extraordinary need.
Thank you, Jen. I think I was able to move some screens aside. Are you still all seeing the slideshow or no? You are. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll advance one more slide. So now we're at the point where some chance for questions and some feedback. I'm just going to leave these up for a few minutes, and then I think I'll turn the slideshow off so we can see each other. But these were just some sort of prompts to get the discussion started, for both us as presenters and then for you to think about as well. So with that, I think I'm going to turn off the slideshow. If I can get back out of here. Seem to be. Is that off?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So I know we just ran through a ton of information very fast. Sorry about that. And I don't know how many folks we have on the call, but I imagine we have quite a few participants, and tried to think of the best way to do this. I know some folks have already started to put questions in the chat function. But lessons learned from where we've already been, we know that coordinating and communicating with each other more than ever is something that needs to continue. We need to keep doing in an ongoing way. And, as we said in the beginning, whether this ends up being a formal report or not, or that ship sort of sails, we're going to keep having discussions and keep opening this dialogue and using the two councils here and joint meetings as one way to share information in an ongoing way, and also to get your feedback and input on this important work we're doing. So with that, why don't we open it up to questions, comments? But before I do that, is there anyone else from the presenting team that has anything we felt we missed to cover, go over, big picture before we open it up? No? Okay. So, folks that know how to use the
Actually,
teams,
Josh, I'm sorry. I did have one thought. I don't know if she's still on the meeting because I think she had to run to go run one of these programs, but Kathleen Burke and Richard Williams have been, didn't jump in to present a slide, but I just want to be very clear that the only reason they didn't is because they are breaking their backs, running hundreds of millions of dollars through the rental assistance program currently, and are just doing an incredible effort, as everyone on this call is. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the State Housing Authority has been a great partner in this work as well, and are going to be critical to the success, since, as you saw from one of those charts, a huge amount of the investment centers around rental assistance. So that will involve not only the local public housing authorities, but VSHA as the predominant administrator of the rental assistance that the state got.
Yeah, very good reminder there, Maura. So I'm going to look at the hands raised on the Teams function, and folks know how to do that. First is a starting place, and you can do that by hitting the little smiley face up there that has a hand next to it, and you can raise your hand. So the first one I saw pop up was Margaret from Champlain Housing Trust.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you all. This is really, really exciting. I had two questions, and Josh, I think they go to you because they were from your ARPA slide. So the first question is, on this projected number of units on the ARPA slide, did that assume ARPA capital only, or did it assume that there was going to be a need for other capital sources? So that's
Great
the first question. And the second question was on the VHIP program, will there be a requirement for at least some of those units to be set aside for people exiting homelessness?
Yeah, great. I think I can answer both of those. So on the governor's ARPA proposal, it's a mix. Most of those unit production numbers do take into account other resources that are out there, low-income housing tax credits, both 9 and 4%, CDBG, VHCB, all the traditional sources in order to leverage and stretch the dollars. But what it does recognize is in the first year, sort of immediate housing, the rapid emergency housing, a higher level of ARPA funding, maybe even not much leverage at all to get those units stood up quickly, like we did with the CRF funding through VHCB early on. And Sarah, do you have any more you want to add to that, since you helped sort of develop those units, that program?
No, right. I think you hit on it. I mean, I think the simple answer to Margaret's question is that was taken into consideration in terms of the time frame for the different strategies.
Right. And in program like the VHIP, which I'll answer your question here, that has a lower unit cost. So when you look across all the units, the type of solutions we're proposing have different levels of expected ARPA capital source dollars appropriated to them, and mixing in the typical leverage we all go after. As far as VHIP, yes, the VHIP program, as it continues, as the legislature is looking at enabling a program for us. The first one we ran through the CARES Act, we didn't have a standing program. We just developed that program quickly in the rules, and it had a component to rehouse the homeless, and that plan is to continue. There'll be more of an incentive for property owners to rehouse folks exiting homelessness with those units. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Let's see. Stephen Marshall.
Yeah, wow, this is so exciting. I'm especially concerned that development of new housing does not spur further sprawl. The state is currently experiencing some terrible fragmentation of the forest lands and the farmlands. I'm wondering if any caveats could be placed in the funding streams on any and every project that eventually emerges here to constrain housing development as much as possible to concentrated settlements. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's built into our system, to be honest. Most of these projects that have a chance to get underway this quickly would be in designated areas that are already have gone through a planning process, such as downtown village centers, areas that are planned and can accommodate growth because they already have the infrastructure and resources in place, transportation, jobs nearby. I think that the approach I've heard used to describe this is not just shovel ready, but shovel worthy projects. And those are the ones that we'll be able to fund and get implemented in this short time frame. I think that most of the housing that I see developed with our public sources are in those smart growth locations, and it really is not best planning practice or practice for putting folks in places that are far flung and don't have transportation and available resources nearby. So I could be very honest and say that's the plan, and I think that's the only way it's going to get done. Not to mention, a number of these resources are going to be repurposing existing properties that are already there. They just need to be converted to housing or to better housing in existing neighborhoods already. It's, reinvesting in housing stock that's already there as one strategy. Anyone else want to add to that?
I think just to reiterate that our development award process when it comes to affordable housing dollars in the state work in concert with our state planning process and our community development planning process, which includes, a pretty intensive review from a planning perspective of the environmental goals of a community and how much thought they put into where development goes and where their capacity is. So that is, as Josh said, very much built into all of our policies as funders as well.
That's really terrific news. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Let's see. How about Rachel Batterson?
Thank you all for working on this. And I first want to just say I'm really excited to see all of these dollars go into perpetually affordable housing. The more, the better in my book. The second thing I wanted to say in terms of the three-legged stool, in terms of services, is don't forget about training for people. And I know a lot of people already have a lot of training, but training in how to relate to and manage people with disabilities, especially mental health disabilities, and the duty to reasonably accommodate those disabilities as part of the overall. I guess what I'm saying is you don't necessarily only need extra services coming into housing. You also need the people that already work there to know how to manage people with disabilities and work with them. And then finally, I just want to say the thing that I always say, which is let's be mindful of fair housing and integration as we do this work, because this is a massive amount of infrastructure building, not just the housing, but also the wastewater and in other plans and other things. And let's make sure we do it in a way that is inclusive. And I would just like to say, yes, it's great to have a lot of housing that's in walkable neighborhoods and downtown and fits with the whole smart growth thing, but there should also be, especially in larger areas, bigger towns and small cities, places that aren't right downtown, because some people do that and some people do need that kind of housing, and that is, fair housing is about having a choice about where you live. So we should not forget about those neighborhoods as well. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for your comments. I think that, one particular form of rural housing that I think, has its own smart growth principles that we often forget about is, mobile home parks. And they, we need to make sure we're investing in those rural housing communities as well. And I think this plans for that, and also plans for the infrastructure needed to support those housing communities. There's other infrastructure dollars in the bucket that Agency of Natural Resources has proposed that really supports this housing effort and even leverages these dollars farther. And so, hopeful that we get a chance to work with that community even closer to bring the needed infrastructure, into these housing projects and not have to rely on just the housing funding alone to make sure that there's adequate infrastructure at these locations. So thank you for those comments. Anyone else want to address any of the other panelists? Please feel free to just jump in and help me answer these questions.
Sure, I will also say to Rachel's comment, not only the location, but I am starting conversations with some folks at AHS about making sure that, for any new development or significant rehabilitation of existing housing stock, that we're making sure the contractors are aware of their ADA requirements and other accessibility features. So there is some forward thinking about not just bringing new units online, but ensuring that they're accessible and can be useful for a broad swath of the population as we go forward.
Yep. Great point, Sean. Also, safety, health and safety. Part of A&R's package has healthy homes for water. Trying to switch out lead pipes and make sure that the wells, if we're going to putting investments into some of these homes and they're on private water sources, let's test that well and see if it meets current standards, and they have money set aside for well replacements if we run into those challenges. Lead paint, if weatherization, if we're going to be going in and doing some rehab work, this is a chance where we have the resources. We're not constrained. We have enough resources to fully address the problems, and why we need to all be coordinated and talking to each other at the state agency level, regional level, and all of the housing partners to make sure we're not missing any opportunities here. Elizabeth, Bridgewater.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm less familiar with Teams. Thank you for being here this afternoon. This is a great presentation. I want to just echo something that Josh said from our perspective as somebody who delivered the VHIP program. I think it's been a really fantastic tool to bring some incremental development into some of the more rural communities. That was one of the benefits that we saw, was that some of the units that came online were in towns that we wouldn't normally look to for a large scale, tax credit style development. And so that was just an unexpected silver lining, I think, of the program. So I'm really excited that that's being proposed for funding. I want to ask a couple questions about kind of nuts and bolts questions. I was really excited to see that you are thinking of collaborating around the funding rounds with across the different agencies. I'd love to hear more about how that might look. And then I'm curious if VHFA in particular is thinking about more than one funding round during this intensive period as a way to pace projects coming through the pipeline, both for developers and just the building and construction community. And then finally, I'm also wondering if there's any talk around regulatory relief as a kind of an emergency response to the housing need in Vermont. So those are my questions. So thank you.
I'll take a stab at the first two and then pass it off to someone else for the hard one. For the first question, you asked about what will it look like if we had more of an integrated funding process? And the answer is, I don't know, because we haven't figured it out yet. I know that we are all very committed to it and we are excited by this opportunity and that we want to figure it out. But what it looks like in terms of, do we each assign an underwriter, or do we outsource the underwriting to one agency who takes the lead, or does it take something totally different where we're all in our own worlds and then we just come together and talk even more than we already do, which is a lot. I don't know, maybe there's a fourth option I'm not thinking about. It's a newer idea that we haven't figured out yet. And what I do know is that we're not going to design a process that doesn't involve the feedback of our stakeholders and what works for others. So we definitely are trying to streamline things, make it easier, go faster, still have the same scrutiny and standards, to get back to Stephen's point about, wanting to make sure we're not promoting sprawl or have negative outcomes. But if there's a way that us as agencies can make folks' lives easier, then we're ready to listen to those ideas and participate. But none of us know what that looks like yet. It's too early of an idea. As to VHFA having another funding round, I'm not really, but I want to pass it to Polly, and let's see, I saw a bunch of different other congressional staffers on this call and say, I don't know, can they get us more tax credits? Because if there's a bill in Congress to increase the tax credits by 50%, if that happened, then yeah, I see no reason why we couldn't have more rounds. As for right now, we don't have a plan to offer a fall round because we know that the applications for this spring round that we'll be deciding on, that the board will be deciding on next month, is oversubscribed. So it's hard to imagine that we would need a fall round if we spent all the tax credits. But what I've learned in this is to not write down any of my plans. I can think them, but I can't actually, because things change too fast. So is there a scenario where the legislature sets aside hundreds of millions of dollars, exactly as the governor has proposed, and therefore we get comfortable forward committing a little bit more tax credits later this year. Maybe, I'm not there yet, but I don't want to say that anything's off the table. It's just, this is a different time. And so hearing from you all, not just in this meeting, but also as follow-ups, you all have all our contact information. We're not shy people. We can put our contact information in the chat with our emails, but, you know, let us know what kind of feedback you have around how an integrated funding source could work, how we can fold AHS into that and have it be maybe a permanent supported housing, you know, funding round, how VHFA can be allocating its tax credits. We ask for that input every other year when we do the QAP, but this is a strange time. We'll take more feedback mid-year. I think the last question to pass to someone else was, around permitting and how we're going to streamline everything. So I'm thinking that's either Josh or Josh.
I think so. You know, but just not to lose sight of if this level of resources becomes available, you know, these dollars could leverage more of the bond credits, you know, which there's lots of space for more of those 4% credits projects. So, you know, maybe those are considered, I don't know, ongoing. But on the regulatory sort of relief, one element of this package, the governor proposed an additional, I think it was 3 to 5 million to deal with the permitting, to hire additional staff at the Natural Resource Board, at the Agency of Natural Resources, and Department of Fire and Safety, so that simple review of these permits wasn't the backlog, wasn't holding projects back. There was also a request to sort of exempt Act 250 for ARPA funds only in designated downtowns, neighborhood development areas, and growth centers. Just like we've been working with the legislature on for the last 4 or 5 years to get that exemption in place. And there's been general, you know, support for that exemption, but it has died each year with the larger Act 250 reform efforts at play. And so the thought was maybe there could be a temporary exemption just for these ARPA funds, since, you know, 2024 is not that far off. We know how long it takes sometimes to get these projects approved. And, you know, unfortunately, there are folks that appeal and don't support some of these affordable housing projects. And all you have to have is an appeal or two, and that timeline is out the window. So there is an attempt by the governor to try to get that exemption here. There's some precedent for time limits on review that came after the sort of the housing crash back in 2009 with the ARA funds, American Rescue Act. You can see Congress isn't too, they can recycle these names, but ARA brought with it a special set of environmental review standards. It shortened the time frame. Most of that was for government projects themselves, like think transportation projects, but there's some precedent there. And so if you look at the governor's proposal and the legislation that was introduced, it had expedited permitting to try to deal with this, knowing that we have to get moving quick, especially on this rapid emergency housing. You know, we have to transition people out of these hotels and motels to more permanent housing. And if those projects are delayed, we don't know what we're going to do. I mean, you know, it's a really tough scenario. So we ask you to also, you know, support to express your support for that if you have had experience with any delays with housing projects because of, you know, permitting and regulatory issues. So hopefully that addressed that question, and I'll next go to Angus, who I know has been waiting for a while.
Hi, everybody. I had a question, and it comes off of something you said, Josh, you know, looking at a time where the financial resources are essentially unconstrained. So when I think about that, and I think about a goal of 5,000 units over 3 years, it's really exciting. But I want to think about what is constrained. And I'm wondering if the group has thought about what you'll hit first. Will it be, do we run out of plywood before we run out of sheetrockers, or are there parallel conversations that would maybe be more labor side around is there enough workforce for your contractors and your subs to move that many units in 3 years instead of 10, as well as just supplies. In Rutland, we ran out of beds when we were doing the rapid resolution program, and I know other partners of mine ran out of ranges for new apartments that came online rapidly. Where will the constraints be, and are there strategies around those?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up it's real. We can't hide from the fact that costs are going to be driven up, and there's going to be supply chain and labor issues. Seth could talk about some work to sort of coordinate with some of our larger contractors. Seth, do you want to just talk a little bit about that working group?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've heard the same thing, just general concern about both the labor and material side of things keeping up with that level of demand. And if you're talking about infrastructure dollars hitting at the same time, potentially having some level of competition between the two. So what we're in the process of putting together is a roundtable to discuss that issue, to see if there's any resources that can be brought to the table, and really just to get them prepared and thinking ahead and trying to space out projects and think ahead about what crews they can shift immediately to ongoing low barrier projects next, right? Like keep things going and move to what's next. In terms of what we're seeing in material costs, I mean, they could give you anecdotal numbers. I mean, we're at $8,000 per unit just in terms of an impact on timber costs, just that one material. So we are seeing it very tangibly and measurably in terms of how it's increasing the cost of housing right now. So we're planning that outreach to have those conversations. We've talked to a few, of the larger builders. They're also confident, though, that we can do this, right? That we can make a real dent in this, and we're going to run into problems and challenges and troubles, and we're going to have to watch what's going on in the region too. If our surrounding states make a similar type of one-time investment into construction, that's going to further constrain our market. We don't live in a total bubble here. And I'll also add that our plan is to do that regionally, because we know there's some regionalization in terms to who's building where and what material and labor experiences have been. So we want to hear regionally if there's specific levels of concern that maybe can be addressed at a statewide level with some additional coordination. So you can expect to see those popping up in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Angus, I've been saying when people brought this up in the legislature, other sources, that we just have to mitigate it the best we can. We can't wait for prices to drop or for labor to come more available. One way to deal with this is to try to get out first ahead of some of our states, frankly, get projects underway, get some of their construction crews here, and also realizing that a lot of this work's going to be sort of economic stimulus for lower wage workers out there, where they're going to be getting paid more. There's going to be people getting paid more to hang drywall, and it's going to be good for the economy and good for low wage workers, and there's going to be more opportunities for people to get into the trades. And so just trying to make the best of it and create lemonade with what we've got here. But it's a whole new world for all of us, that we're always dealing in a resource constrained environment where everything is just, picking away at little projects over, where this is opening up a whole new, future here. And, Gus has said it and others have said it, where, we got to build a bigger boat for all of us to sort of work together on. So. See here. Mary Ellen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Mary Ellen Griffin. I'm an attorney at Legal Aid. And I noticed on the charge from the legislature when it was originally this group was convened, that there were two things about service, and I'm wondering if you guys have talked at all about service. So like providing service supports for households experiencing homelessness and those who have transitioned to permanent homes to ensure housing stability, preventing homelessness. And whether you could speak, if you had talked about that, and I noticed Kathy Beyer mentioned more resources for Division of Fire Safety, which I think she's referring to like keeping people safe in their homes where they are by having a more functional code enforcement system. So just wondering if the group had thought about any of those kinds of things and where you were at.
Yeah, Sarah or Allison, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, I'll start, and then maybe I'll toss it to Allison, who can talk about the work around permanent supported housing at the agency. So part of yes, we have thought about that. It's an important point, Mary Ellen. Thank you. And I think our biggest our biggest funding source, our biggest tool in the toolbox around housing stability services right now is going to be the ability to use, excuse me, part of the emergency rental assistance program funds for housing stability services. They're just set aside in both the original allocation of what's called ERAP funds and then the second allocation as well. And we did already issue an RFP for housing stability services jointly, actually, with the Department of Housing and Community Development, DCF did, to invite proposals to do that. And I fully expect that we'll be continuing those. Initially, I think as all are aware, and has been pointed out, the rules of the game keep shifting as we're playing it, but originally ERAP funds were just going to go through the end of December with some possibility for extension, and now the end date of that has shifted. So I fully expect we'll be tapping that resource as one of the main ways that we support general housing stability services to help get people into housing, to help them maintain housing. And then I would also say that the Agency of Human Services last summer did specifically commit to re-engaging around this question of permanent supported housing and the ability to bill Medicaid to support that. And so that work has been ongoing, and Allison Hart is probably best positioned to talk about where we're at with that.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Yes, building on what Sarah said, the state has to renegotiate its Medicaid waiver this year. And as part of that process, it's still all in draft form, but as a part of that process, as an agency, we're proposing the idea of creating a permanent supportive housing benefit. And so that is, something where we will take that out for public comment and we'll get feedback. There's a whole sort of other process around the Medicaid waiver work. And so you guys will be alerted to all of that. But this is just to say that we are working on that internally, and we have all our department support in rolling that out. And we're hoping, again, I have Medicaid policy folks on the phone, so I have to be careful. I don't want to overcommit, but if things work out well in terms of timing, we're hoping that the Medicaid benefit could help us with the integrated RFP so that we can really combine the capital and rental assistance with services. So that's pretty much all I can say on that.
Yeah, and I'll just add that when you get a chance afterwards to look at these slides, and if you look at that funding matrix, you'd see that the ARPA dollars for housing capital, is a fairly big chunk. But before we had that source, if Maura would have done this chart that sort of proportions out the uses with the sources of funding, you would have seen a big gap in actual capital to build housing. Until this point with this ARPA proposal, it's just a proposal, we had more resources for rental assistance and services, and the big gaping hole was no money to build the housing to fully utilize those resources. It was one of the main reasons why, the governor proposed so much capital to build the housing we need to fully use these emergency resources that are going to be with us for a couple years. But your point's still very well taken, that it's all three legs of the stool to be successful. Let me see here.
Josh, I think Will Eberly has been waiting.
Will. Yep. So I was going to go to next. Will. Are you there, Will?
Hi, sorry about the mute issue. Thank you so much for your incredible work on this, all the panelists. I have two questions that are perhaps two sides of the same coin, and that's really just a question about equitable funding regionally. Are you guys giving some strategic thought to how to make some investments over the next few years, given the historic opportunity with the amount of funding that we have available, to ensure that there's really a regionally equitable disbursement of monies? And the other side of that question is, what mechanisms might you be able to use to really anchor those investments to the demonstrated need in different communities around Vermont, evidenced by things like coordinated entry lists? So just sort of matching the need and attempting to have, regionally equitable investments to whatever degree possible. I realize there's all types of constraints around the developers you can use and the funding, constraints and the timeline and all of that, but just wanted to put it on the table to kind of see what thoughts you might have about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure all the funders could probably answer it from their different perspective. But as envisioned, the proposal for the housing capital dollars, anyways, there would be a mix of VHFA, VHCB, and DHCD that would distribute these funds. And through each of our processes, regional distribution, need based on real, market analysis, and other assessments are all part of those competitive funding sort of decisions. So in the big picture, yes, that would happen, and it's baked into a lot of the processes. But I don't know if Gus or Jen or Maura or anyone would like to add on to that.
Sure, Josh. I guess I would just say that geography is right in our statute is among the things that have to be considered. I think we did a pretty good job with the CRF funding last year and getting all over the state. We always come down to where can deals get made, but we're looking very much at the data that Sarah's provided us about where we have the most people trapped in motels because they can't find housing even with a voucher. So all of those things will go into the work that we need to do in making sure there's equitable distribution. And for those of us who have to go in front of the legislature, which I do every year, every committee wants to know, what did you do in my community? And with this much money, we're going to have to answer those questions and pass a straight face test that we made extensive outreach efforts and did all we could to provide technical assistance, feasibility funding, and so forth to make sure every corner of the state is served. So that's very much on all our minds.
Yeah, and so I would add as well, in some parts of the state that have different housing needs, we would look for reinvestment in existing housing stock or repurposing existing buildings in some parts of the state that have those opportunities. In other parts of the state which are growing more and they need net new buildings, that would also be a lens that each of us would look through, and sort of gets back to a few other questions about smart growth and well-planned investments for sure. Let's see, Amelia.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Amila Mirjanovic. I'm with the Refugee Resettlement Program, USCRI Vermont. Thank you for the invitation, Allison, to this meeting. I'm new to this group, and thank you for all the work so far and advocacy. This is really, really exciting. As we also look to rebuilding of the refugee program in the state, it really housing is one of our major concerns. Both the availability, affordability in this area, but also in other parts of Vermont. We applaud the governor for his support and his wish to triple the number of refugees coming into the state, but without affordable housing and available, larger unit housing, we're very concerned. So part of the issue for refugee families, incoming new refugee families, is that we cannot access affordable housing because families don't have Social Security card when they arrive. They don't have employment history. They don't have a landlord history. So I would like to put out a proposal that, you know, this be looked at, because refugees are such an important part of our workforce. And upon arrival, you know, as soon as the Social Security number is secured, all employable adults will be going to work. And then the other issue is there's a sizable Muslim community in Vermont, and for many families, accessing loans, interest-free loans, would enable them to access home ownership. They might be ready otherwise, but because of, you know, lack of interest-free loans, they're not moving to home ownership. Again, thank you so much for including us. My colleague is here, Matt Thompson, as well. And he put in a question about whether there's a plan to develop or finance affordable housing for large household sizes, because, you know, most refugee families come in larger sizes, 6, 7, 8 members.
Thank you, Amelia. That's I was talking just recently with the mayor Winooski and the housing authority director there, and they were referencing that fact that family housing. You know, we've shifted a lot of our building to meet most of the market demand in smaller, 1 and 2 bedroom units, but for new American community, the demand is the other direction, 3 or 4 bedroom, and it's really hard to find those. You have to wait for a long time. So that's certainly something we need to make sure is available and in the mix. And also, thanks for bringing up the point about, the governor, is trying to encourage more refugees to settle in Vermont and open that door, and even more reason for this housing investment to be supported. It's just coming off the heel, right before this meeting, seeing the news in the legislature that the resources were cut quite a bit compared to what the governor's proposing. I'm going to need to do a better job reminding folks that, we're asking for these, the demographic challenges in Vermont, the workforce challenges, and everyone wants to address those. Well, we can't address them without providing the housing for people to move to. And this is a chance to do that and to prepare Vermont for the next, for decades to come. And so missing this opportunity now is really limiting those other solutions that everyone supports. And they need to recognize that they're connected. And the chance is now to sort of make that connection. So thanks for bringing that up. I think next is Chris Snyder.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a couple of questions for today. One is, we talked about growth centers, downtown designation, and supporting growth within those areas. And one of the underlying issues is sewer and water capacity within those downtown areas. Do we think that is A&R funds and some of the housing funds going to be able to support, capacity increases? So that's my first question. And then my second question is, I can certainly talk to Seth and more after, but about how to engage with home builders and developers, private home builders and developers. And I would think that there's an opportunity across the state to access, if we're going to build 5,000 units within the next 3 years, we're going to need to utilize all the permits that are already in place. And what this might be is the capital that could potentially support that private developers to work within a realm that we probably haven't worked before and be able to add the capacity. So a couple of questions there about how to encourage those two things.
I'm going to jump in on the homeowner one and the contractors and just say, you're right. And should we have, let's go with the governor's proposal, $42 million to support new homeownership in the state, then let's have those conversations. But about an hour ago, I don't think that was in the plan that the legislature had. And so, and I know that that wasn't all the year one proposal that the governor had, but I want to go back to maybe a little advocacy and say, we've laid out what we knew as of this weekend when we were all working on this slide deck, but you know, this keeps changing. And so one reason that, you know, we go with the pretty graphics instead of adding up all these numbers about what's going to housing is because it does strike some people that maybe we don't need to put this much money into housing. Maybe we should be doing other things with this money. Pick your favorite topic from the headlines, pensions or state colleges or something else. And so I think what Josh just pointed out about housing underpinning all these other things is really important, as well as the demographics overall, in that even if all these resources were available, the idea that we really could create 5,000 units with this much investment is a stretch, knowing what labor and materials prices are doing right now and the high cost of housing and just how much need there is. And so right now, so yes, Chris, you're exactly right. And the minute there's money available, or even a strong indication that money is available, I think we're right there with you. But right now, I think it's really important for us all to maybe come together and be encouraging just money for housing, and that we don't get lost among the competing priorities of what all the headlines are that we read about.
Yeah, Chris, I would just add on the A&R infrastructure funding, there is some funding contemplated to help communities that have problems with, you know, for example, combined sewer water overflows, where, you know, folks were making the argument that we shouldn't be adding more housing to these wastewater systems in these communities already because they have this combined sewer overflow problem. But that's leaving out the fact that these are systems that have the capacity for more people to be brought onto the systems, but we need to solve the stormwater component for those systems to work better. So all this is saying is, yes, there are dollars in A&R's proposal, if supported by the governor, to address some of these issues in communities with existing infrastructure challenges, as well as money for smaller community-based systems where, you know, there's villages all over this state that they've had their Vermont community VCRD visit, and they've identified affordable housing as the #1. They've even got their project figured out right in the village, but there's no wastewater system. So it'll never happen until they are able to install some infrastructure. So there's money contemplated for those projects as well. And just to reiterate what Maura said, right now, from what I just saw from the Senate, more of the home ownership and middle income developments proposed to help address our demographic challenges and workforce challenges was not a priority for the legislature. So if that doesn't change, we'll have to shift what we're, you know, proposing to develop and how it would all work quite a bit from this original proposal. So, you know, that's kind of where things stand at the moment.
Thank you, and I certainly understand the challenges. But as you look forward, and as things go forward, you know, certainly I think those are opportunities for us all.
Thank you, Polly.
Hi there, and it's a great conversation. Thank you, everybody. And Polly, I'm with Senator Leahy's office, and a couple folks have mentioned the delegation, so I thought I'd hop on and address a few things. Rachel posted in the chat asking for an update on the American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure proposal that the White House has put forward and that Congress is looking at and working on. And I guess my update on that is that there's no, at this point, defined path forward. It's something they're working on. They're trying to figure out, is it something that can be bipartisan? Is it going to be another reconciliation bill that doesn't need to be bipartisan? And which path Congress ultimately decides to take will really inform what is included in that bill. So the White House's proposal does include housing. It includes $250 billion for housing. But there's also another proposal that was put forward last week by the Republicans that does not include housing within its definition of infrastructure. So I think my advice would be to focus on the funds that are in the state now. There's a great opportunity with what we have from ARPA, from the CRF dollars, and as the infrastructure plan does move forward in one form or another, I and my colleagues will be working with all of you to understand Vermont's priorities that need to be included in that bill. And I hear from this group that housing is certainly one of them, and Senator Leahy would agree. But it's really great that this conversation is focused on the funds that are in state right now. I think Maura also talked about the need for more tax credits. There's certainly a bill in Congress that has been in Congress for the last several sessions, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, I believe. And Senator Leahy has been very supportive of that bill and will continue to be. Maybe it's something that could be included in a infrastructure bill. But again, we're gonna work with the resources we have right now as we try to move things forward at the federal level.
Thank you so much, Polly. Obviously, your support, your boss's support, is a big part of why we have these opportunities in front of us. And can't thank you and Senator Patrick Leahy for all the work he does consistently for Vermont. So thanks for being on the call as well.
And I know Erhard would have hopped on if he was able to stay for this part of it. So, Senator Sanders was represented. I believe Tafine is on as well.
Is Tafine on?
Or maybe she was earlier.
Okay. If she was, just give her a chance to follow your lead. But well, maybe she'll pop on in a minute. But I think the next hand up, I think, is Gus. Got little / I think that's you, Gus.
Oh, I just wanted to reemphasize the point that I think you've made, that this is the time in the year where people need to speak with legislators and let them know that this is a priority. There have been lots of good questions asked today about how this is going to get done. We're at the very beginning of this effort, not at the end, and we're going to be adjusting all along the way, and the details are much less important than the goals the governor's laid out. So I think just wanted to encourage everybody to speak with those people who represent you about the opportunity the governor has put in front of us to make a once-in-a-lifetime investment, something a lot of us have dreamed about for a long time, and the necessity of doing that at every level of the housing continuum that we all have been working on for so long. I'll stop there.
Thanks for that reminder, Gus. It is less about the details right now and just more about, do we share a massive investment in housing that we know we all need? And we've seen the need for years, and it's only increased during this last year. And so making your voices heard is the important thing right now. We can sort out the details later and how all the programs are delivered with your input as we go forward, but we have to get something to the finish line that is meaningful and helps us lay out a future for Vermont that is one we all share. So who's next here? Stephen Marshall?
Yeah, so I'm really enjoying this whole conversation. I'm so glad that there's so much thought about building more housing. I guess I want to just quickly latch on to Chris Snyder's points about building infrastructure and how that could liberate a lot of private funding to build housing. It seems like this would be a golden opportunity to ensure that there's sewage and electrical and whatever, water supplies, et cetera, for communities in the future to develop off of. But the big question I had, it's not all that big, it's looking like it's not going to be housing primarily through private entities, for-profit housing development, which excites me a lot. I really believe in the nonprofit housing sector. I think that the best landlords in Burlington are nonprofit housing. I live in one, and I think they're great. So I'm just wondering how much we see this funding creating publicly owned or nonprofit owned housing. That's my question.
I think, the details, like Gus said, are a little hard to give you numbers, but I think the plan, anywhere where it talks about homes for those exiting homelessness or permanent affordable housing, I think there's a good connection there to a lot of those properties having that sort of ongoing relationship and ownership. But I think there's also room here for everyone. I mean, there are lots of great nonprofit affordable housing developers that we've worked with that also are sort of at their capacity with projects right now, and they are partnering with private developers in their region and having good projects come out of that. A collaboration is what we really need in order to get this many units going. And so I don't think it falls on any one sector or any one type of ownership to get all this done. I think we really have to leverage the resources of everyone, including private owners, to build the housing we need and have a housing for everyone on the whole spectrum of incomes that really need housing, and one is connected to the other. When we can have a home ownership and someone can move out of rental, it sort of starts that whole cycle of housing needs. It keeps it going, I should say. So I don't have a specific detail I can give to you, Stephen, on that specifics, especially when the numbers keep changing. If we end up knowing what we're going to get and what the legislature sort of puts as goals framed around either income levels or type of housing, we can get at that in much more detail.
I'll just say really high level that for VHFA's tax credits, about 90% of them go to nonprofit housing developers historically. And I know that VHCB has it in their statute to support the nonprofit housing network. And so their state trust fund dollars go to them exclusively. And so the nonprofit housing network is, as Josh explained, the doing this work day in, day out for the past 30 some odd years. And so I expect that they will be key partners on a lot of this money.
Let's see, other questions or comments from folks? I know we wanted to emphasize that this is not the one and only chance. We threw a ton at you. We started out the meeting saying, never mind, what we're going to tell you is all changed, but not really. Keep talking about it. And so we also don't want to leave you with the thought that this is the one and only chance to engage with us. I think we started out saying our plan is to continue this engagement process, feedback loop, regardless of whether we end up submitting this report as the original legislation said, or something else changes in the interim. There's so much need for us to keep having these conversations and keeping each other informed about what's available, how we can, stay on the same page and support each other, that there'll be more opportunities for you to provide feedback to us and engage. I think right now the plan is at least every other month we'll have one of these get-togethers, and I'm sure we'll continue to refine this as we go and have a better process, and maybe even some meetings in person down the road. But just wanted to throw that out there again before we wrap up, if there isn't any other questions or comments from folks.
Yeah, and I guess
maybe wrap us up here. Or?
Sure. Thanks everybody for coming, and perhaps I'm speaking out of turn here a little bit, but the legislature has it in their power right now to appropriate the funds that we've been talking about. So I encourage everyone to contact their lawmakers and support the proposal that we've been talking about that the governor has put forward. Other than that, yeah, we will we'll absolutely continue to have conversations about this as it goes forward in whatever form and with whatever funds are allocated. And I think everybody on the call knows how to contact me, so feel free to give me a ring or shoot me an email, or bump into me on the street. However you want to have that conversation. So thanks to all, and I will be sending out the slides that we shared as well as the recording of this meeting with everybody afterwards.
Thanks for joining, everyone, and thanks to all the other housing partners to put this together with us. It's really, you guys did a big lift there, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.